On the panel, we have Nick Halstead, we have Gordon, Vivek, Jay Ellison, and I'll have everyone do some brief introductions as just say your name, which business you're with, and then what is your data as a service business model? Like what data are you selling, or why would you consider yourself in the data as a service space?
Okay, so Nick Halstead was obviously just on stage. So our model is re-syndicating content, and our business model is pay-as-you-go. So simple as that.
I'm Gordon Redzik from Navtech, and our business model is basically licensing map content as well as location-based advertising.
I'm Vivek at Rapleaf. We're a consumer data company. We help businesses personalize experiences for their consumers. We do that through real-time data about consumers. It's customizable through our API.
I'm Jay Adelson, CEO of Simple Geo. We provide a number of services for developers to add location awareness to their applications. We don't actually sell data per se, but we do offer access to it.
Great. So I guess the big question is, what is data as a service, and is this new? Maybe there have been companies in the space for a while. Maybe you guys are maybe invented this industry, but what is it, and is data as a service new?
Well, I think it's has emerged over the last 6 months. The fact is, most big data companies, you go on the website, and the first thing you'll end up doing is filling in a contact form, speaking to someone. They'll probably then actually want to come meet you, and then they'll want to install a whole load of servers in your own server room, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what's changed is, data as a service is following the whole, cloud model of, making it on demand, making it available via, APIs. So APIs are just, the API ecosystem has just suddenly exploded. So, I think that's the most disruptive thing to the current, data companies out there that, yes, they've got the processing, they've got the specialization in their fields, but what's just like so many other services on the web have disrupted the large companies is that when you, we think certainly with our service, when you go to an on-demand model, the scale is anything. So, people ask us, what is your use case as well? What do you want it to be? And, that's the model that can suddenly bring in the ability for small to very large companies using service-based products based on the web that will be so, pretty scary to most of the incumbents out there.
Yeah, when you're looking at consumer data, that's been around for quite a while, 20, 30 years. You have the traditional offline data companies. And that's been accessible to the big Fortune 5,000 type companies. The first time, really, that data is now available to the long tail companies, the SMBs, startups, et cetera, where now it's an even playing field. So if you look at it from that perspective, it is new.
Yeah, and I think one thing from our side, as kind of a bigger company than the rest of the folks here, I think the key is we were actually basically like on Netflix, where we started off as basically a creator of DVDs and sending maps to garments of the world every quarter, and now we're trying to kind of reinvent ourselves and be much more of this data as a service model. I think we're kind of faced with a unique challenge when compared to the rest of the folks here.
Cool. What does it mean for data companies, data as a service companies to win, to succeed, to reach that $100 million growth? Does it mean that everyone in your customer vertical or horizontal, or do you cross horizontals across many industries? What is your company's strategy using a data as a service business model to just win in whatever industry you're going after?
Sure, well, I can start with that one. I think that the assumption that we're making is that location data, in our case, is relevant. It's granted it's a niche, but it's relevant to so much of what's going on in the industry. So we're going to stay very much focused on that. Now, the different applications and how that translates to revenue and growth depends on a lot of different industries and their growth profiles. For example, the entertainment business and how they bring location into their applications, or something like financial services industry might be at a different pace. Also enterprise, and where enterprise is going with being able to store and process this data. So based on the relative growth of those markets, we think this is a great big opportunity. That being said, I do think that you look at other data service models where the general processing, like we've heard earlier today, of the data, providing access to the analytics, that is offered in aggregate a very big market in and of itself. And not my business, but
yeah, it's focusing on not being focused.
exactly.
It's and that's really down to, again, it's, I keep pointing at Amazon, but Amazon, you don't see in any of their literature any specifics to a vertical. It is very much the horizontal.
I also think it also depends on the type of data you're providing and how it's productized. So if you have very specialized data, you're probably going to hit a few key niches and verticals. If you're providing much more broader data to hit to satisfy more meaningful density, then you're probably going to take a more horizontal approach.
Cool. So you can have, probably everyone has different answers to this question. Information is becoming cheaper and cheaper, and we're going to explore that with our next panel. But I wanted to ask from a business perspective, how do you convince a venture capitalist to invest in a startup whose business model is to provide data?
Well, it's been done. I think you have to believe that you're getting in front of some kind of megatrend of some kind. I believe that there have been data and analytics companies for many years that have already proven that there's a big business in there. The question is, what is the megatrend you're getting in front of? And venture capitalists like to invest in that. I think that the real-time nature, if you think about how social media gave us this incredible real-time source of data, being able to process that data and offer it in a constructive way to folks is a business that I pretty much every significant venture capital firm on Sand Hill Road right now is investing in some way. And the question is really whether, which one of those megatrends you're getting in front of.
Just add one thing. I mean, if a company like Navtech, which is very kind of old school type of mentality, in some ways is really vested into this, I think that basically speaks for itself. I'm pretty sure that everybody here in Grandin Valley is doing the same thing.
It also goes without saying, like, the team's super important. If you're a data company and you're very heavy on marketers and salespeople, I would be a little wary and a little suspicious of that. If you have a rock star team of engineers and let's say you have 75% of your team are engineers, that's pretty sexy I would assume that's pretty sexy for a VC or an investor. You have your first to market, you have proprietary technology. Those are all really important and key.
Great. Now, we all want to, I guess, be or otherwise be part of the category killer of data as a service. But at the same time, oftentimes in this business, your competitors are also providing you data, or you're providing them data. It's kind of a frenemy type of industry. Do you have some instances or some kind of, is this new that sometimes this competitor is also my ally because data is just flowing back and forth fluidly? Is this going to get bigger and bigger? What do you think about that?
Well, I think I can only speak to location data, right, just as an example. I mean, the sources of this data are ridiculous right now. There are just so many different players. Some who have offered sort of the old school monopoly view of how they manage that data. Others have been more open with that data. I do believe that most of the players that I've talked to, though, recognize that certain types of data are moving towards free. They're moving towards a more of a commoditized model, except for where the service level is concerned. And so if you already acknowledge that strategically, then you really have to focus on your differentiator. Maybe the package, maybe you're good at cartography, for example, or maybe you're good at, capturing data in real time through phones. Whatever it is that you are doing that's specialized becomes your business model, and not really putting barriers up for access to I guess the content itself. Does that make sense?
I think so.
So, I mean, for us, we've got a number of partners now obviously including Twitter in terms of Clout and others where we license the data, but we built in right from day one, even though they said to us, no, we just want our data out there because it's a great distribution model for us. We said, no, we are always going to include a percentage of any of our profits that we can then start, because we want to convince them that they want to have their data re-syndicated, that we can make them money, because then that gives us, if we can start proving that as a model, then we can obviously start tapping into others who right now who don't want to give that data away. If we can actually prove the distribution to tens of thousands of smaller companies, then we can actually then start paying for some of those people who may not have a direct route to their revenue. So there's a few out there that I know where...
Don't get me wrong. We pay for data too. I feel like it's moving.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. When you're dealing with consumer data, it's incredibly incestuous. Rapleaf, we partner with traditional offline data companies. And so we do have a lot of these frenemy type relationships. I think it's key to set up a channel for these data partners and other data companies. That way, when you're monetizing, they're monetizing as well. And that way you can play in a friendly space. And I don't believe it's a zero-sum game. I think they can win, we can win, and we all can win.
All right, one more question, then we'll take Q&A from the audience. So on this topic of kind of collaboration and that, yes, we're kind of competing, but at the same time, this is not a zero-sum game. We're all adding to the ecosystem. What other opportunities do you guys see from your perspective of running these data as a service or data-driven business models? What opportunities do you see for other startups to come in and solve your problems or your customers' problems for you?
I actually saw a couple outside. So one of them for us specifically is we have certain technology challenges being from our location in Chicago and things like that people in this very room can basically resolve for us just because there's a lot of talent in this area. And I think that's one of the things that we're always looking for is like people that can kind of come in and very quickly help us out and solve some of the technology challenges that we have on a daily basis.
I think this is where the marketplace comes. Why it's so you're going to see a lot of marketplaces, and then you'll actually start seeing more niche marketplaces as the market matures. So we very much believe that we wanted to not just give abilities to other companies, but also potentially to individuals at home. And so you imagine. Turning every one of you into analysts. If you want to go on there, you've got an idea of what some big corporate would like to see in terms of some analytics of comparing this brand with this brand. You can go on and do that data processing yourself, and you can create that report and go and sell it to them. That's making a whole new marketplace that's amazingly disruptive to the current market out there, because you're suddenly turning every individual on the internet into their own analyst, with tools that you could never have dreamed on before unless you were a multi-million-pound company.
I would just say, right now I think we have something like 15,000 developers creating concepts on this platform with the data, and I don't have a clue what a lot of them are doing yet. You see like the calls coming, and the creative ideas, the whole idea of predicting what this market's going to do with all this accessible data is impossible. And what I'd like to see, if I could get some help, it's new ways of really demonstrating the power of this data. Something like the visualizations I saw outside, the stuff that Nick is working on. I mean, this is powerful, and I just want to see more people do it and provide it as a resource to my developer community.
Great. Well, then we'll just take some questions from the audience.
Questions?
Go ahead.
And on and on. Like, how do you feel what do you think we're thinking about what you're doing?
So in brief, how do you feel about your users or customers' perspective on your use of their data?
Well, the quick answer in terms of geolocation data is, we ask you first. So it's not something that we can engage in the process of without participation and cooperation from the user. Now, specific, like in our case, say place data is one example of data that we have. Place data is a little bit different than private personal information, like sentiment about your opinions or things that you could target. Now, when you start to move into the proximity, when you think about advertising and advertising to you based on where you currently are located, that's where things start to get interesting, because maybe you don't want your location shared with an advertiser. Again, today, most of the applications I'm seeing give the user that level of control to actually be able to say, listen, we don't necessarily think you're going to be cool with this. In general, I agree with the previous presentation that most of the users who have access to these applications are aware of what they're doing. They're sort of aware of what's being collected versus not being collected. So I'm not sure yet we've really run into the abuse of that data and a real solid case of that to basically create any kind of policy or regulation around. But
if I can just quickly build on top of that, just because it's geo-related, but basically from our side, I mean, our brand name is definitely on every Garmin map or whatnot, but it's very much an opt-in only type of option for location-based advertising stuff. And as far as you giving us kind of information about your place of business and whatnot, that's once again, we're very clear about if you give us information in a certain manner, this is exactly how that information we portrayed on, down the line in our downstream channels.
When you're dealing with consumer data, based on the last presentation, I disagree with the presenter about privacy. I think privacy is incredibly important. We at Rapleaf are we are concerned about privacy more so than the industry that we're involved in. We provide notice and choice for consumers to go in and actually see what data that we have. So I think providing that tool and providing that transparency is really important. When you couple that data with some of the services that consumers engage with, consumers tend to be a little bit more conservative. They tend to outweigh the delta in the negative rather than the delta in the positive. And so what you need to do to overcome that is to delight them and show them that with this data being used, personalized to them, that it actually benefits them. We work with one of the biggest daily deal sites, and for someone like me who's a customer, I no longer get Brazilian spa packages or Brazilian wax packages like I used to. I understand I'm a pretty hairy guy. Now it's scotch tasting, and it's information that I'm disclosing publicly based on my demographics, my interests, my intent, etc. So that's personalized to me. And so, we as an industry need to do a better job educating consumers, and I think we'll get there over time.
Another question? Go ahead.
Something I've always worried about is that it seems like there's a focus on this intense personalization, and we're missing some of the benefits of in the past of non-personalization, where things were addressed to a group, or things were a consistent experience, so that you can converse about that experience with others. And it seems to me that as you get super personalized, you can no longer share your experience of an application, of a site, of a service with anyone else and expect them to get the same experience as you.
Yeah, so I think there's a balance there. I definitely wouldn't want to go to ESPN.com and see ads all about Macallan 18, Macallan 25, just scotch all the time because they're trying to personalize it to me. I think that I'd get sick of that. So it's a balance. I think part of that has to be at the responsibility on the consumer end, and part of it has to be on the company side as well, to decide whether you want to provide this personalization or just provide something more generic. But we found, just doing studies, that consumers are more drawn to personalization whether it's products, services, daily deals, ads, emails, et cetera?
I think that's impulse. I mean, I think there's two worlds that we're talking about, right? There's sort of the serendipity of discovering something in your experience because it's like the water cooler component where you're sharing information. I think, though, that if I'm sharing tons of data and I can then somehow discover something that I otherwise wouldn't have discovered, that's also valuable to me. So that's a consumer interface problem. And you have to make sure you have both, that you have the ability to have these sort of shared experiences and also have the ability to discover new information with personalization. And I think, based on the amount of data going through Twitter right now and these feeds that I'm seeing, this should be really an amazing time because I'm seeing both of those clients or both of those interfaces appear now in a number of different consumer properties side by side. Where advertising is concerned, I don't think that there's that question. If it's more targeted, you know, the record shows people like it better. So I think, though, it's in these other mediums like news or whatever, not that I know anything about that world.
That was a much more eloquent way to put it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Go ahead.
What about not targeting just one vertical, but data marketplaces? What kind of features would see that being a viable business?
Aggregate data versus narrow.
Well, we actually built our platform. We actually made the decision 18 months ago that we had to take from multiple data sources. So although we talked about Twitter today, DataSift is totally data agnostic.
And from our side, I mean, we're consuming data from thousands of sources, so it's completely agnostic as well.
Are you raising the question about third-party data versus first-party or second-party? Kind of the benefits?
So we've actually been asked by multiple customers to provide that type of kind of focused experience on a very specific kind of, you know, I guess hyper-focused sources that we kind of curate ourselves. And we've also had kind of interest as far as, hey, give me everything you have and I'll curate to it for myself, you know, and I'll choose what to present. But there, you know, there are points, I guess, of Navteq's business where, you know, we're definitely capable of doing certain things better than any source that we know of out there in the world, you know. So those are things we're kind of providing as an extra to our users.
I think one of the problems is each data source has different metrics. So you can kind of say volume across the board, but when you get any more detailed than volume, the kind of metrics you would track for Twitter and the kind of metrics you track for Facebook are kind of completely different, just because the way sharing works differently, the viral element works differently, behavior on each service. So the kind of things you need to look for tend to be different. So which is why you tend to get products that are specific to particular sources, and when you make them more generic, you actually start to tend to mean you're losing the data that's actually you really need to know about the one particular platform.
And one last question. Go ahead.
You're gonna have to shout.
An entire learning curve that I have to go through to access and then maintain every single data source that I ever hit. Do you think that the lack of standards is really inhibiting this business from taking off in terms of distributing data and making it freely accessible to a broad range of developers and users for a broad range of applications.
I don't think you're ever going to change that. Startups, when they build their APIs, they build it around the nature of their business. There's been a few instances that I can point out where people have duplicated the Twitter API on top, just because the Twitter API had so many libraries around it, it became sensible for other services to mirror on top of their normal normal API, the Twitter API. But the reality is, I don't think that's ever going to change. Does anyone disagree?
Jay, if you want to comment on the place location data, trying to normalize that.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, looking at it as a consumer of data through other people's APIs, because we have to conflate that data and make it usable by everyone else. I mean, you wouldn't believe how the data itself is stored in so many different ways, and so I feel the pain. The best that an API developer can do in terms of the developer relationship, though, is just abide by best practices. And there are many published groups and sources of information around best practice for APIs. And what I've noticed, at least in my experience, has been that over time, these startups that have their sort of data-specific applications, over time, the more popular they become, their developers guide them right into that standardization, if you want to call it that. It's not perfectly standard, but closer and closer to common practice. I don't know if you guys have seen the same thing.
Yeah, we haven't seen that concern from developers. Concern comes more from non-developers and marketing folks that come across our API and
They don't know what the heck it is.
they're just like, what's an API? I don't know what this is. And so they're looking more for a turnkey solution. I know InfoChimps is doing something interesting around aggregating a lot of APIs and standardizing, excuse me, standardizing the integration around that. But we'll see.